Welcome to Positive Talk with Kevin McDonald. Hey, that's me. Hi, and welcome to Positive Talk. Our show features the best positive stories and people from around the globe as we endeavor to answer the universal question of why am I here and what is my purpose? Understanding that can change everything, and knowing your greatness is fundamental to living your best life. So join us right now as together we work to create the adventure of our lifetime. Oh, I'm very fortunate because I get to talk to a lot of people who are in the middle of creating the adventure of their lifetime because they've had a great time of life. They've done some incredible things. And one of those guys is with us today. His name is Gene S. Jones. And it's going to take me a minute to go through all of his stuff. So I'm going to endeavor to do that because he is he's known as the America's trivia guy because he put together a talk show that he then went and he took around the country, not a talk show, excuse me, a game show. And he would go to different events and play. Give me a hint. It's a trivia game show. And he would have an entire group of people that would be all involved in the game. And he would give out prizes, and they would, if they could figure out the answer and that kind of, and so it became a very interactive thing, which was the last thing he did before this thing. But he did other things, like he was a fire breather, he was a juggler, did all kinds of things. He's been doing this his whole life. Oh, I don't know, 5 or 6 years anyway. Sorry. But actually, Gene has been doing this for well over 40 years. And he's right there. And it's interesting. It'll be fun to talk to you, sir, about all the things you've done and how they came to be.
Ready to start, wherever you want to start. I will say one thing about your intro. It talks about people finding their greatness. And there's a quote in the book that I just recently wrote, which is that the greatest thing a person can do for another person is to help them find their greatness.
I love that quote. That is really cool. Well, I'll tell you what, why don't we start there? Because all the other things you've morphed into now, what you want to do is you want to do some writing and you want to really have an impact on humanity in a positive way. And that book is called Consolidated Wisdom. And the ultimate book of quotations, and I didn't get the chance to write the rest of it. So the ultimate book of quotations, and
it's for success, happiness, and health.
Exactly, which is what we're all after is success, happiness, and wealth. But I think mostly, if you're happy, you are wealthy, aren't you?
Well, but it's for health, not wealth.
Oh.
In fact, one of the sections in the book is all about success and happiness and work. And the wisdom quotes that are in the book from all millennia is in agreement that wealth is not the ultimate decider of happiness, that you can be poor and happy and you can be rich and very unhappy. In fact, David Geffen once said, anyone who thinks that money can solve your problems hasn't got money.
Well, it's interesting because I've talked to people that have traveled the world, and some people have gone to places that they have nothing. They got nothing. They got a mud hut and they got a little mat that they sleep on, but they're happy because they have family and they're all in life together doing some fun stuff. I think it's a lesson for all of us that it doesn't necessarily take a great deal of stuff. If you hear George Carlin talk about it, a great deal of stuff that we don't need to have, that we can be happy without any of that stuff, can't we?
Exactly. And in fact, the desire for accumulating possessions can often be a cause of unhappiness because you're pursuing something that doesn't necessarily give you gratification. And that's not to say that possessions are bad. No one is against possessions. It's just when that becomes your goal, as opposed to, say, having a happy home life or something like that, which is a more fundamental human drive, it can be a distraction.
You know what the interesting thing about that is that a lot of people strive and they strive and they work and they work and they work to attain things because in their world that's the thing that's going to make them happy. But then when they get those things, they determine that crap, I'm no happier than I was before. Now what do I do? How do I figure this part out?
Well, there's a quote in the book that the best way to reach happiness is to make others so. And basically, there's a section in each chapter called Great Minds Think Alike, where I'll have more than one person kind of saying the similar thing from different periods in history. And that's one of the quotes. Even Mark Twain goes into a whole thing about happiness shared is double the joy, and grief shared is half the sorrow. So the whole idea of sharing and the humanity of it is part of what lends to happiness.
I got to ask you because you've been in front of people virtually your whole life and you've done all kinds of things. You've been in movies, you've worked in, you've done a lot of stuff. What led you to this?
Well, it started with my game show, actually, which you just mentioned, the Give Me a Hint Trivia game show. And during the period of time, I did it for 35 years. I like to put in quotes and see if anyone knew who said it. Or sometimes it would be, can you finish this famous quote? So I'd leave out a word and the audience would have to come up with that word. And over time, I didn't realize it, but I had really accumulated a massive number of great quotes, which during the pandemic, I had time to look at. So when I looked at it, I said, maybe I should make a book out of this because people should get an opportunity to see these great quotes from great minds of history. And it went all the way back to 5,000 years ago and all the way up to Taylor Swift right now. So there's a great agreement. And you find that people in different eras of history were dealing with the same issues, which I found really fascinating. So then I started researching the people behind the quotes. And that's what evolved into the book that I wrote, Consolidated Wisdom, which took over 3 years to research and finalize, even though I started out with this large accumulation of quotes from my game show.
Do you find that it's kind of interesting that you can have a quote from 2 or 3 or 4,000 years ago, and then you can come up with another quote that is more relevant to today, and they're the same?
That's it. Yeah. And that's exactly the beginning of the book. That's what I talk about is how history does repeat itself. And it's not always a good thing either. I mean, it repeats many things that are in common. And then it also, when you talk about politics and war, it can be quite tragic how history repeats itself because human nature hasn't changed. And one of the quotes in the book is about how human nature hasn't changed, but the tools we implement to get what we want have changed greatly. So technology has changed the terminology, has changed the methods, but the actual human nature end of things is still pretty much the same.
So in our basis, what would you describe to be the human basics? What is it that we're all striving for? What is it that we're all after?
Well, I mean, when they break it down, say biologically or anthropologically, there's the need to eat, the need to procreate, the need to be safe. And so humans, one of the unique things we did was the way we gathered together to form social networks. Now, there are other animals that do have social networks, and mothers take care of the children and fathers hunt, the male hunts. But it was a unique way that we developed tribal life and other things. But the basic fundamentals of human nature, the desire to be safe and those things, they still exist in our more primordial areas of the brain.
Why do you think it is that when we put together a tribe or a group, that we become part of that group, but then we become distant from other groups?
Well, there is a theory, which is pretty much borne out, that any group over 150 becomes disorderly. So there's a reason why tribes didn't exceed certain sizes, because then you run into conflicts and duplication of skills, things like that, that cause, unhealthy competition. And within a corporation, for instance, that's why they have divisions, because if you just said, okay, all 8,000 people work towards getting our company successful, people will start stepping on each other's toes and things like that. So you need divisions so people know the focus of their area of expertise.
That's really interesting because that's true. Is that the larger the group is, you have other people, and then they begin to compete for power. Everybody wants their segment of them that want to be the leader, want to be the head cheese, the bosses, if you will. And if you got more than two or three of them, then you got a problem.
Even if they're all altruistic, it's very easy that somebody will try and do what you're trying to do, and maybe it's for the right reason, but only one person can be doing that thing, or else if you do it two different ways, it becomes a conflict. So there's a lot of ways that it becomes a conflict, which is why CEOs of large corporations earn their money when they can get everybody working efficiently within their own realm.
So I got to ask you, Jane, do you think that it is inherently human nature for us to be divided from each other? Or do you think that there's a way that we can get through that and recognize that we're all human beings working together?
Well, I think that that's the essence of spirituality, which is discussed greatly in this book because it is a major issue when you're dealing with things like happiness and what makes success. Because one of the quotes in the book, Maya Angelou and Dolly Parton, two people from very different areas of life, both agree that it's very important to make a life before you make a career. And to understand that you have to have a life before you, or at least in conjunction with any career that you have. So yes, I believe that there's an interconnection of all things. And in fact, when you start studying wisdom, you realize that everything is interconnected. The question is, how do we go about being connected and not become political or, disagreeing with each other over how to do things, even though we might agree on what we want the ultimate end to be. There's so many different ways to get there.
Well,
It's like a GPS. One GPS says take Route 6 and the other says take local streets. And you have to decide which you want. Maybe there's a lot of traffic, so you take Route 6 or the other one, or maybe there's an accident or the weather's bad or a tree fell in the road. So there's different routes to everything. And I really believe that tolerating other people's opinions and points of view is the key. And that's where I think society is splintering right now, is the fact that people aren't respecting each other when they have differences.
And the differences can be profound. By the way, you know what Dolly Parton's favorite quote of mine is?
Go ahead.
It takes a lot of money to look this cheap.
Good one. It sounds like you're going to start your own wisdom book now.
No. I would rather read yours, because I'm going to be starting a music show on Brushwood Media at one point this spring. And I want to take your book, which is Consolidated Wisdom, and to use that in between the songs to give people something to think about of perhaps a better way to live. So,
well, there's also some good quotes from musicians such as John Lennon and other people like that that are in the book. So you might be able to use those in conjunction with songwriting or different aspects of the business. So even one from Clive Davis, the great A&R person who was with Columbia Records and then started Arista Records.
You don't by chance happen to know off the top of your head a John Lennon quote? Because I'm a Beatles fan from way back.
Well, actually, the one that comes to mind actually wasn't about music so much as about happiness, because he was asked a question in school about what made him happy, and when he told them, they kind of didn't agree with him, and he couldn't understand. He thought they were really screwed up because they didn't allow his view of happiness to be accepted.
And what was the view of happiness?
I wish I could remember that. I'd have to pull out the book and read it to you.
Well, which would be fine, because as we discussed before the show began, it is not possible for you to come up off the top of your head with 5,000 quotes. I mean, that would be a lot to ask of anybody.
Yes, it would. Even a trivia guy.
even though before the show started, we talked about, because I watched, and by the way, go to this website. He's got a new website coming for the book. And what's that website going to be called?
It's going to be genejoneswisdom.com, and it's going to be up by next Monday.
Perfect. So
And
Gene
the
Jones,
book will be released on Wednesday, May 1st.
I am looking forward to getting a copy of it, because I think that we can all use a little bit of wisdom and actually I don't know if you've noticed, but in this day and age, I think we can all use a lot of wisdom, because we seem to be not paying attention to our best selves and what we should be doing in a lot of cases.
It is true. And that's why I wrote the book, really, because I really believe that wisdom is the way to heal a lot of the divisions and wounds that people are inflicting on each other, and sometimes on themselves. People don't realize when they are angry and full of venom towards someone or something that it's actually bad for them as well.
I was watching I really do try to stay away from the news, but occasionally I get sucked in, and I was watching a particular show, and these people were talking about politics, and they were talking about differences of opinion, and they were yelling at each other. They made themselves look just really stupid, because they were yelling at each other and not listening to anything that each other said, and they weren't having a constructive dialogue. It was a shouting match, and we've kind of developed an art form for that of late, I think.
Well, that's what, extremism on any side kind of creates that, because the beliefs become entrenched, and it's unfortunate when that happens.
Indeed. So I gotta go back in the midst of time and
Sure.
talk to you about what's it like. What's it like to be a fire breather and not burn yourself? How do you do that?
Well, my mother would say it wasn't very wise to eat fire because I could get burned. So I guess that was because I was young and adventurous. I was with an international vaudeville troupe, and I was actually their business manager. But they decided I should learn as many skills as I could, because I used to go to conventions to represent them, and they wanted me to demonstrate. So one night they knocked on my door, and a few guys from the troupe came and said, "Let's go out in the street. We're going to teach you to eat fire." And I thought they were kidding. So I came out in the street, and they weren't kidding. They had torches and lamp oil and flames, and they lit these things, and they taught me how to blow fire right in the street. And I still remember neighbors looking out their window and screaming, "My God, what are you doing?" And it became something. So I started demonstrating how to eat fire, and I also learned to juggle when I used to go to these conventions. And one day an agent said, "Well, why don't we just hire you instead of the whole troupe?" And I tried to insist that they should hire the troupe, but this one fellow insisted on hiring me. So I became a fire-eating juggler on the road, which I ended up doing for about 4 or 5 years.
That's pretty that's pretty impressive.
And the key is to know when you're eating fire that fire burns up. So in other words, don't look down if you're putting the flame in your mouth, because it'll burn your nose. But if you look up, then the flames are burning up out of your mouth. That's less harmful. And if you know the techniques, I never got burnt. The only time I got burnt was blowing flames, and I didn't realize that during the sound check, they didn't have the air conditioning on, and the AC was blowing directly at me. So I blew a huge plume of flames, which hit the AC unit and came right back in my face.
Ow.
Burnt all my eyebrows off, and it was rough. Got a standing ovation from the audience when I dove onto the stage to put the fire out. They must have thought that was my regular act, and that sooner or later I would burn myself up. But
see, I was always under the impression, and we need to take a break, but when we come back, we'll talk more about this. I was always under the impression it was some sort of a magic, that it wasn't really a fire that you were actually messing with, but it was really the real thing that you were messing with, and you could get burned.
That's right.
That is simply amazing.
No fakery. It was real fire, real flames, and you just had to know the techniques so you didn't get hurt.
By the way, we're talking with Gene S. Jones. He's the author. How's it feel to be an author, by the way? That must feel pretty good.
I love it. It's very interesting transitioning from being an entertainer and always being on stage to being in my office at home and writing. It's actually turned into a new passion that I really, really treasure.
And you know what's going to happen is that you're going to find over time that even though you're in your room by yourself doing your writing, that as the books come out and you start getting email responses and people saying, this was really helpful for me, and I just love what you did, and it lasts for a long, long, long time. It becomes your legacy.
Well, as my wife would say, from your mouth to God's ears.
Well, I firmly believe that a book of wisdom, boy, do we ever need it now. We're talking with Gene S. Jones. We need to take a quick break, and we will be right back with more on Positive Talk.
They have your eyes. They have your ears. They have your smile. Now all they need is a little more of your time. Make a difference in your child's life, because anyone can be a father. It takes time to be a dad.
And welcome back to Positive Talk Radio. I need to play more of that because he's an entertainer and he'll recognize this indeed. And Gene S. Jones is our guest. He was he still is. He could still do it if he chose to, but he's chose to take another path, which is to become an author and to really to put out books. I think. Well, let me ask you. This book is one that I think people will use for a reference book for a long time for a lot of different reasons. Is that why you have turned to writing, or are you in what is your motivation to do this?
Well, the whole idea is really to share any knowledge that will be helpful to people. I think I've been very fortunate in my career. I've really had an enjoyable career in every way. And I just want to give back at this point in life. By the way, I mentioned John Lennon. If you'd like, I found the quote in the book. I could read it to you.
Oh, please, please, please.
Yes. See, it's good when you take breaks. I can do research.
Exactly.
Okay. So this one is about songwriting. Songwriting is about getting the demon out of me. It's like being possessed. You try to sleep, but the song won't let you. So you have to get up and make it into something. So letting go is what the whole game is.
Do you know that is such wisdom right there? Because every songwriter, virtually every artist, every author, they all tell me that there is, through their intuitive capabilities, that there's a moment in time when they can't stop until they write it down or to get the process going. That happened with Paul McCartney in Yesterday. The song was a dream, and there was a lady who wrote a 3 book trilogy, and she was told to get up and write the book at 4:00 in the morning. So every day for 18 months, she got up at 4:00 in the morning and wrote for an hour. And that happens to you guys. Did it happen to you that way?
Well, you mentioned something that I really think I'd like to share, which I think maybe your listeners can benefit from. There's a thing I call the daily download, which is to write down everything on your mind before you go to bed. And if you wake up with things on your mind, write them down then. So at the beginning and or the end of the day, do your daily download. And that's not necessarily to be creative or anything else, but to clear your mind. Because to get new creative ideas, you have to stop holding on to other things in your mind that kind of take up that space. So for me, to be creative and to come up with new ideas, I have to write down the ones I just thought of. And I think a daily download for anybody in any field of work, in any aspect of their life, if they're dealing with an issue in a interpersonal relationship, write down what it is you're thinking, because it'll help you get to the next idea. And you never know when one idea's, presence is blocking the other from coming in.
It's interesting that you say that, because I've worked with a lot of psychic mediums over time, and John Edward is one of my favorites. And he will say that he'll be doing a reading with somebody, and he will say, "I'm getting this." And they'll say it doesn't ring true or whatever, and he says, "Well, I'm getting this, and it isn't going away until we figure it out. So we can't continue until we figure this out. So we're going to continue to talk about this until we get it done, and then they figure it out, and then they can move on." That's kind of the way it works, isn't it?
Yes, and it's true when you want to master something as well. For instance, as a professional juggler, when I wanted to go from juggling 3 and 4 balls to 5, there were certain things you had to learn to do with 3 to be able to get to 5. You had to be able to throw the 3 balls up in the air and clap your hands and catch the 3 without failure before you'd be able to get to 5. So in other words, there's steps in all kinds of processes to be able to master them. So it's not just creatively or with, some problem, but also in any phase of life to keep on taking incremental steps. And many times one step not being mastered is blocking the next step, as you said.
Yep. And then, for me, it happens at 3:00 in the morning. So I would
Set the
recommend,
alarm.
yeah. Well, I would recommend that you always have a pad and paper by your bed.
That's part of the daily download. That's actually what I do. And I use it just about every night. I write down something. And it could even be something simple, like don't forget to buy fish tomorrow for dinner. Because if you're trying to remember to buy fish for dinner, you're not going to have that great next epiphany, because you're still thinking about the fish.
and the fish blocks out everything.
Yeah. I mean, that was an oversimplification, but it's really true. Any little thing can block the next great idea.
What I would like to expand on that, if I might, and that is this, is that when you get those downloads, and we all get them, and it doesn't matter where we think they come from, they either come from the universe, from God, from our angels, wherever they come from, they come. And if you poo-poo them, if you say, "No, that's silly," and you don't listen to them when they come, there may be something important that is in your future that is designed to be done, and that's how they are helping you move in that direction. And if you don't act on it, or at least don't consider it, then you're never going to get to where you yourself wanted to go in the beginning. Is that fair?
Yeah, well, you're bringing up a lot of interesting subjects, and I almost need to be doing my download while you're talking, so I don't forget to get to it. But there's so many aspects here. So you talk about the collective consciousness, which comes from Carl Jung. When you talk about the ideas are just floating in the air, and some people are receptive to that and some people aren't. But it's so interesting how different societies that were never in communication back in the ancient days all came up with the same things at the same time. And you wonder how. And I can't remember the exact number, but I think it was the theory, and I think a movie was made about it, about the 100th monkey.
Yes.
That on a given island, once 100 monkeys mastered something, then the monkeys on other islands all of a sudden knew how to do it. And how do you explain that? I'm not going to try to explain it, but you know that it happened. So it's something you have to consider. And whether you take it in a religious format, the universe as a spiritual thing, or you also say our minds are constantly working. And with more creatively oriented people, such as myself or you, we're always trying to come up with something new. And we're trying to synthesize all the information that is in our brain already to come up with some new, unique combination. So I believe that the constant act of recombining and the desire to do so within your mind also contributes greatly to all these things. Plus, the more experiences you have, the more things you have to process to put into that whole amalgamation.
Don't you find that the act of creation just all by itself is exciting just for itself.
Oh, it's miraculous. Sometimes I go, wow, where did that come from? But I got that idea. And also the thing is, if you don't write it down right away, say you're in bed and you dream up something, and you go, wow, that's fantastic. I'll write it down in the morning. It's not going to work. You'll wake up in the morning and you go, oh, I had that great idea. Well, I can't remember what it was, but I remember I had a great idea. And then the whole day you walk around going, God, how can I find that idea in the catacombs of my mind? And it 90% of the time will not happen, which is why not only do you need that paper by the side of your bed, if you get the idea, say sleep be damned and turn the light on and write it down.
Yeah, and if it can't be a piece of paper, and you can talk to your cell phone or whatever, just write it down or remember it somehow, because it's important.
Well, to try and remember it, once again, I talk about many times in my workshops, memory blockers. Like, what are the things that block your memory? Why you can't remember something? And there's a thing in Buddhism called near enemies. Near enemies are things that are very close to what you really say are thinking or want, but they aren't the thing. But once you get that in your mind, it blocks you from getting to the thing. So it could be a word that sounds just like the word you want to remember. Like my wife might say, what was the name of that actor? I think his name was George. Well, his name was Gregory, but she said George. So I'm hooked on George, and I can't get to his name because his name was Gregory something else. Like maybe Gregory Peck, but she said George. So I'm looking at George Patton or somebody who's totally wrong. So that's a near enemy in the sense that it's so close that it actually takes me away from the path I need.
Exactly. By the way, we're talking again with Gene S. Jones. He is a new budding author. He's got a great book coming out called Consolidated Wisdom. He is a game show host. He did one for 35 years and gave away a bunch of money, and he was a trivia show. And when we come back, I'm going to ask him how, because he did this show. I watched a video of him doing it earlier, and he did it. He had no problems. All he had was a fistful of money that he was giving out to people. And I got to ask him, because he would actually have people in his audience. He would say, what category do you want to get a question from? And they would give him a category. And like one guy said, science. So he then was able to give a trivia question based upon science without having to look it up or say. And I got to ask him how that memory worked for him and how he was able to, because that had to be a skill. And probably he was able to do it because it was naturally gifted for him, but it's also a skill. I'm going to ask him about that when we come back. Again, we're talking with Gene S. Jones. On Monday, go to his new website, which is going to be
GeneJonesWisdom.com.
Perfect. And we'll be right back.
You're listening to Brushwood Media Network, the best in syndicated talk, news, and entertainment shows.
As you go about your daily life, look closer. As you gather with family and friends who love and support you, look closer. There are youth right in your community who don't have the home, warmth, and healing you have. So look closer. Every year across America, a staggering 4.2 million youth are homeless or trafficked. And for 50 years, Covenant House has worked relentlessly to keep them safe and protected. Tonight, 2,000 young people will sleep safely in a Covenant House bed. And tomorrow, they will wake up surrounded by love. They get clean clothes, hot meals, medical care, and a safe place to sleep. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. In sites across America to help them fulfill the great promise of their lives. So look closer at Covenant House. To help or get help, go to covenanthouse.org.
And welcome back to Positive Talk with Kevin McDonald here on the Brushwood Media Network and YouTube as well. And we're talking with Gene S. Jones. And I got to ask you, Mr. Jones, how did you come up with that memory of yours?
Well, first of all, I just have to make a comment about the commercial you just played for Covenant House.
Thank you.
Because you asked, what are the basics in human nature that haven't changed? Well, Covenant House, the things they're taking care of for these youth are all those basics: safety, food, shelter, those things. Those are the basics that humans dealt with back in our primitive days. And then everything has just gotten more complex and complicated and technological since. But we're still humans who need those things, the basics in life to start with, so we can be most productive.
It amazes me, and I would really like our country to really take this to heart and to do something with it, that 4 million kids are either homeless or being trafficked on any given day in the United States of America. And I just think that that's crazy.
Yep.
We should be better than this. We should be better collectively, individually, and as a team, because I consider us to all be working together as a team to make our country and the world a better place. And we have the ability to do that. We just sometimes don't.
Well, the thing that happens, and I learned this by touring as an entertainer, and I worked in over 40 states around the country, is that we are told that we're one America. But within our country, the different states, the way people live is so diverse that it's really quite something to try and bring all those different diverse ways of thinking, ways of living, even ways of making a living together so everyone understands each other. And I think that's the great challenge of a large society. If you don't have a totalitarian society where it's dictated, and you have a democracy like ours where people have free choice, it's much more complicated to get everybody on the same page.
Now, I know that you worked in over 40 states. Have you ever been what they call the left coast? That would be.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I actually worked out there for 2.5 years as a talent coordinator in Los Angeles.
Very good. Because the people in the South and some of the other areas of the country consider the West Coast to be the left coast because we're a little bit more liberal out here, according to them.
But these are all generalizations.
Exactly.
And to me, large societies live on generalizations and symbols that are, constructed to unite people over some commonality. But I learned by being down south and then being up north and then being out west and being in the Southwest and being close to Indian reservations occasionally, just how different the upbringing of people is, the outlooks that they have. A farmer sees the world a lot different than the Wall Street guy who's trading his cattle futures, and yet they're both looking at cattle, but it's a very different view. One guy's looking at what comes out the rear end of the cow, and the other guy's working on how to manipulate a derivative. So when you look at society like that, you realize it's a great challenge to get everybody thinking, and not necessarily alike, because you don't want to push conformity, but at the same time, just to respect each other. And I think that's the key. Respect the fact that people are different, and that doesn't make them worse. It doesn't make them better. It just makes them different. And actually, it's quite interesting to learn about all these differences. It's why a lot of people travel around the world to see all the different ways that people live outside of our country. And they find that fascinating. Yet sometimes we come back home and they don't tolerate differences within our own country.
It's interesting to me because I traveled for a living for a period of time. I was a chicken salesman. I don't know if you've met any one of them before.
That's a first for me.
So, but I went throughout the South and stuff, and it's just different because they have a different outlook. They've got different generational things. Like in Washington State, there really was nobody here before 1900, but you've got families in the South that maybe have been living in the same house for 200 or 300 years, and stuff. So it's hard. Sometimes it's hard for them to relate to people that are different and stuff. And how would you suggest that we all kind of understand that and work together to change, to move forward in the 21st century?
Well, I think it can't be done in a massive stroke, first of all. These things have to be done incrementally because, and it's true about solving problems too, on any level or in any different genre. If you try to just jump to the end, a lot of times you miss all the necessary steps in the middle. So even if you succeed, it's somewhat frail in the fact that it doesn't have a good enough foundation. So I think that we have to find some entry points of understanding and agreement, something, and just build on those things slowly. And I don't think that it's something that gets solved quickly, but at least we can start moving in the right direction. And that's really what my book is all about, is not to tell people what to do, but to give them different ideas on how to do it and, maybe how to change their own lives. The whole idea is to get your own wisdom codes for your own life and how you want to deal with people. One of my big things is to live with grace. And even when I disagree with someone, to do it in a nice way, in a friendly way, in an understanding way, to understand, well, maybe this fellow has an agenda of his own that he has to be respected for as well, as opposed to just saying, this is what I want.
Exactly. Where mine is, like, I end every show with the phrase, be kind to one another because each other's all we've got. And it's so kindness for me, kindness to your cashier, kindness to the waiter that is taking care of you, or the bellhop, or somebody that's serving you, to be kind and to be thoughtful towards them because they're doing the best they can, even if it doesn't fall. Yeah.
Well, that takes us back to your original question of this segment, because the last question, and it was the only question that was in every show I ever did, is how can you translate this phrase, amor vincit omnia? And sometimes the audience knew, sometimes they didn't. It's a quote from the poet Virgil, the famous Roman poet, and it is love conquers all.
Ah.
And that's how I ended my show and wished everyone a lot of love in their life and a little bit of a couple of sentences to that effect, just because that's really what I was trying to do, was create an atmosphere of love and entertainment and joy that people can bring. There's so much power we have to do that for others if we just kind of learn how to do that and do it willingly and gracefully. The world will be a better place just because people are being nicer to each other, which brings us back to my game show, if you'd like to.
Yeah. Well, because I was thinking about your game show in the fact that a group of people who don't know each other, different walks of life, different ethnic backgrounds, and they get together and the focus is on you. It's not on themselves or each other anymore, but it's on you, and you're giving them a great time. They're laughing, they're applauding, they're all happy, and the divisions seem to just go away. Was that your experience?
Well, yes, and I'll tell you kind of the dynamics that I found. First of all, just about every show I ever did, I would always want to peek out, because a lot of times it was a dinner theater kind of setup, so people were eating. So I'd want to peek out while they're eating and just you could feel the vibe of the people. Like, how are they talking to each other? Are they drunk? Are they not drunk? Are they laughing? Are they in a bad mood? Sometimes corporate, maybe they just announced bad earnings and I have to come out, and it's supposed to be the happy part. Okay, the company's going bankrupt, but here's Gene Jones to give you a few, your job is on the line, but let's have some fun now. It was never quite that bad, but there were times where, people were having disagreements or whatever. And then I was hired and I had to come out no matter what the situation was. And I would many times look at it and I go, oh boy, this is going to be tough. And I'd go out and somehow within 2 minutes, everybody was screaming and having a ball. And to me, it was the miracle, not necessarily myself, though I did know how to get to that point, but the fact that people really are funny. And my show is based on Monty Hall and Art Linkletter and Johnny Carson. Those three were my guiding symbols for how to be on stage. And Art Linkletter, because he had a show on TV when I was a little kid, People Are Funny. And he also had one, Kids Say the Darndest Things.
Yes,
well, so do adults. And if you give them the right atmosphere, if you make them the funny guy and you become the straight man, it gets really funny. So basically, I would become like Johnny Carson would become the straight man sometimes for his guests. And it would get really funny because he would point out how funny they were. Well, I would point out how funny my audiences were to themselves. And then they could laugh at themselves and laugh with each other. And also, when you start doing trivia, there's always different people know a lot about one subject or the other, but not the others. So people start to realize, hey, Joe over there knows a lot about tech. And if you're doing corporate work, they actually figure out who to talk to when they need tech help. And then so-and-so knows about management, so they know who to talk. So I was brought in many times as a team building trivia show. And we would actually do team building based on my trivia game show. So my game show was often used for purposes, not just as pure entertainment, but it was always entertaining first. And many times I had to roast a guest of honor, where I had to do a lot of research on the person or even read a book about them if they were famous, and then come up with information about them in a framework that would make people laugh. So I'd have to find out cute things about them and turn them into trivia questions and then ask the question.
I'm sure it's probably in your book. There's a old saying that was acting is easy, comedy is hard, because you had to study and to learn all about your people and your guests and the timing and being able to put it together and all that stuff, right?
Well, I trained in Commedia dell'arte, actually, which is the Italian improvisational theater of the Renaissance.
Oh, very cool.
And that's learning how to be funny as opposed to doing funny things. Now, if you can learn the essence of comedy, physicalization, mood, timing, all those fundamental things, and make them absolutely part of your nature, your DNA, then everything you do is amplified when you're in front of an audience. We had to do crazy things like stand on one leg with a blanket over our head and make people laugh. And we couldn't sit down until we did. And there were people that actually dropped out of the school over that exercise.
Oh, I can believe it, because that's not an easy thing to do.
Well, me, I just said, I'm going to stand here till that audience laughs. And that's what I tell people who want to be entertainers when they come to me for training or anything. I say, could you live with this? Could you live without this? And if they say yes, I tell them, this isn't for you. I mean, I knew I had to put my life had to be in the world of entertainment. It just had to be. No day job ever. I'm going to make it this way or I'm going to die. And if you have that attitude, I mean, the people who make great successes, and a lot of them make greater success than me, so I'm not trying to put myself on par, but those people have to do it. They have to do it. It's just in them, the drive, whatever the need is. And to me, the need was not to get applause. It was to entertain and bring happiness to people, to make them smile, to make them laugh, to make them think.
Which is why I brought you here today. And thank you, Lindsay, for making that happen, because Gene S. Jones is our guest. And go to his brand new website, which is
Gene Jones Wisdom.
GeneJonesWisdom.com. Very good. And I this as a public service announcement, whenever I have a guest like you on, I always want to say to every parent that is out there, please give your children the gift of improvisational acting and have them learn how to do it, to think on their feet, because whether or not they want to be in entertainment is immaterial. It gives them a whole sense of confidence in themselves, the ability to think on their feet, the ability to do a myriad of things that they wouldn't have the confidence to do otherwise. So, and Gene, will you agree with me on that?
Yeah, actually, I'd like to make a really important point here about what you just said, because many people say, oh, I'm not creative, because they're not a musician or something. But there's two different kinds of creativity, which I do point out in my book, Consolidated Wisdom. And that is practical creativity and artistic creativity. Practical creativity is in everybody, and it's a teachable thing that everyone can learn. And that's the same as the improvisation that you're talking about. So I say to people, don't get tripped up by saying you're not creative because you can't paint or you can't play a sonata or whatever the creative act that you think is creativity is. Practical creativity is learning to solve problems, learning to, master challenges, learning to live a better life.
That is very well said, young man. And we need to take our last break of the day. It's just a short one, and this is about making sure your elders are taken care of financially and stuff like that. So we'll be right back. We're talking again with Gene S. Jones, and he's got the new book out, which is Consolidated Wisdom. And it's like 5,000 quotes. It'll take you a couple moments, but it's worth every moment of it because you can really expand yourself. And like he said earlier, understand your own wisdom. You can create your own wisdom from this book, I do believe. We'll talk about that when we come back.
A lifetime of savings can disappear overnight. Millions of dollars are stolen every day from unsuspecting older adults by family members, caregivers, and trusted professionals. If you suspect financial exploitation, call the Elder Care Locator at 1-800-677-1116 or go online to the National Adult Protective Services Association to be connected with help in your area.
And welcome back to Positive Talk, everybody. Gene S. Jones is our guest. He is an entertainer extraordinaire for his entire life, from breathing fire to being a talk show host, to which he did as well as being a game show host and giving away money and helping people. And now he's an author. So it's just a progression in your life from one to the other, I do believe. And I want, for one, would like to thank you for being here and helping us all work to live a life a little bit better. And if they read the book Consolidated Wisdom, they can come up with things that resonate with them to create their own philosophy of living a happier life. Is that fair?
Yes. Well, I'll put it this way. The book doesn't demand anything from people, but the last chapter in the book is a chapter that I call Wisdom Meditations. And it's my own unique protocol for applying the wisdom in the book to your own personal life by doing what I call auto brainstorming. And it's too complex to explain on the show, but the basic idea of it is that you can take quotes from the book and study the people who made the quotes, and then start to be able to intuit with your own intuition the kind of thinking that they have and use it for your own challenges and problems. So the wisdom meditations at the end of the book apply to that question that you just asked.
And I love it because we can all use a little bit of wisdom and a little bit of a difference of opinion or a different way of looking at things. And when you've got 5,000 quotes, there's going to be some that you may agree with and some that you may not. But at least don't you think information is power?
Yeah, well, I mentioned this in the book in the introduction. It's not necessary for you to agree with all these quotes to gain from them, because you get to see different points of view, which may, somewhat alter your own point of view for the better. Or you might say, well, it's good to know that people think like that so I can understand them better. So the idea is that all wisdom has a merit in some regard, and particular wisdom that applies to your own life. And out of all the quotes in the book, if you find 10 quotes to live by, it's done its job. So by no means do people have to read every quote. And in fact, I advise people at the beginning, I have a navigation chart, which is how to navigate this book. It's a couple of pages. And one of the things I suggest is not to read it from cover to cover, but to pick the subject you're most interested in and start with that chapter. And then at the end of every chapter, there's a whole bunch of possible chapters to read if you're interested in in a particular quote. So you can actually say, well, I really like that quote, and it refers me to chapter 6. So then you read chapter 6. And by doing that, you'll end up reading the whole book, but in the order that's best for you.
I would even suggest, this is just me, but I would even suggest that what you do is you take the book and you have it closed right in front of you. And then you come up in your own mind with a question that's been bothering you or something that you would really like some wisdom about. And then you open the book, and I'm willing to bet that when you open the book to that particular page, that you will find wisdom there that was talking about what you were thinking about. I don't know whether that's true or not, but I think that that's possible.
Well, it's a very cool idea. And I will say, you just absolutely defined the whole idea of the wisdom meditations, because the whole idea there is to get to your, what I call, central question. And I try to help people who are struggling to figure out what their central question is. I give them a whole modality to figure that out in case they're confused. Because some people know, well, this is my issue. But some people are going, well, this isn't working, but I don't know why. So I need to figure out what the real question is here so I can figure out how to master it. But yes, exactly what you said is a very interesting way to approach it.
Well, you know, and I firmly believe, well, I say in the opening that all of us at one point in time in our life have the question, why am I here? What am I here to do? What is my purpose? What is it all about? And I suggest that you look at this book as a way for you to start getting some answers and then follow through on what the wisdom is that you're gaining from the book and pursue it so that you can understand who you really are, why you're really here, and then you can attain your greatness. That's my opinion. What do you think?
Well, I mean, if people do that, I will be thrilled. And I'd love to hear from them. Anyone that has a great success or epiphany because they looked at my book, Consolidated Wisdom, I would be just delighted to hear about it, because that's why I wrote the book. It really is it. And I love doing individual counseling for that reason, because I get to actually see that person progress while I'm talking to them and advising them. And I will say something about the last commercial break, because I've actually taken my own advice. And now every time you take a break, I do my download. And it mentions elders. Well, that talks about taking care of elders. I would like to promote the idea that elders have a lot to offer. And that's where a lot of our wisdom can come from, the wisdom of the elders. That's how tribal societies have lived and prospered for millennia. And we somehow in this country of ours have really kind of turned away from that. And I think embracing the energy of youth combined with the wisdom of our elders is a great thing and could really help everyone. And in fact, the name of my first book before this one was Younger and Wiser, which is dedicated to that concept.
That's a beautiful concept, because the one thing, you're right, the one thing that we don't do in this country is we tend to throw people away.
When we stuff them in a home and we take care of them, we see them as a burden. And, you know, medical conditions can cause those kind of situations. But in general, older people have great experiences. They've made mistakes, but they've also seen what those mistakes are, so they can warn us, younger people, so we don't make those same mistakes. And it's so important to embrace that. And I have a whole chapter in the book, Native American Wisdom, which is the wisdom of Native America elders.
I got to get the book. I love it. I think that it will provide a lot for everybody. The name of the book again is Consolidated Wisdom. The underlying title,
The Ultimate Book of Quotations for Success, Happiness, and Health.
The name of the author is Gene S. Jones, and his website will be up on Monday. The book is out on Wednesday, and the website again is going to be
GeneJonesWisdom.com, and my name is spelled Gene.
I want to thank you for being here, young man. It has been my pleasure to have you here. You are extraordinary. And will you come back and we can delve more into the book of wisdom?
It would be my great pleasure. I really enjoyed talking to you as well.
Thank you so much, sir. And by the way, everybody, get the book. It'll really do you good. And it's going to be out on Wednesday. It'll be out everywhere, and in the short period after that. So thank you, Gene, for being here. Thanks for listening to this episode of Positive Talk with Kevin McDonald. Our purpose is to provide everyone with a positive, entertaining, and educational experience. I would love your feedback and comments about the show, including possible topics and great guest suggestions. Please email me at kevin@kmmedia.pro. And remember, be kind to one another because each other's all we've got. That's Kevin at KM.